had to get your thought on Bitcoin.
I think it's rat poison.
Okay, so what's Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is the strongest asset the human race has ever invented. It's like gold with none of the defects of gold.
If you told me you owned all of the Bitcoin in the world and you offered it to me for $25, I wouldn't take it. This is the only thing that's money.
Well, the evolution of Bitcoin over the years has influenced changes in my view. It has proven itself.
But to me, it's just another bubble. In fact, it's probably the biggest bubble when it comes to how ridiculous it is, because I ultimately think that cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, have no value at all.
I do think people are maybe underestimating Bitcoin, and if Bitcoin ends up being the cyber equivalent of gold, it has a great potential left.
Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Travis, and if you're new around here, I like talking about investing or anything to do with building wealth. I also occasionally talk about topics related to personal development. If you want to hear more about topics like these, make sure to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and if I say anything dumb during the video, you can always unsub at the end. So, in today's video, obviously I'm going to be talking about if Bitcoin could ever replace gold. The way that I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to be taking a look at why gold was originally adopted as a store of value and as a worldwide currency. Basically, what traits made it an obvious option as a form of money. And then of course, I'm going to take a look at the traits of Bitcoin and how those compare to gold. Basically, we're trying to look at, is Bitcoin better at being that storage of value? Do Bitcoin's traits make it a better option than gold? Because in my opinion, that's the only realistic reason that it would ever replace gold. So to start, I wanted to address the question that everyone seems to ask, which is, what is backing the US dollar? Basically, the whole point in this question is to point out the fact that gold is no longer backing the US currency. But then that forces you to ask the question, okay, well then what is backing gold? Well, most people state that it's the belief in gold that backs gold, along with its history. And this is true, but in my opinion, it only explains part of the story. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, so then how did this belief in gold as a store of value come to be? Because obviously it didn't always exist. Well, let's start with the fact that it's not because of its industrial uses. I've heard numerous economists claim that it's valuable because it's a good conductor or because you can fill your cavities with it.
Gold has underlying use value. You can use it to fill cavities. The underlying use value of Bitcoin is to do ransomware or something like that.
I hear this debate all the time, and I'm gonna be honest with you, this is not the trailer that I would hitch your debate to. This is evident because only 11% of gold is used for industrial uses. And even more evidence of this, silver has a lot more industrial uses than gold. Like 56% of it is used in industry. Yet unanimously, gold is still considered the better storage of value. You could argue that its use in jewelry could influence its perceived store of value, but even that shouldn't give it a market cap of $12 trillion. As the YouTube channel Economics Explained put it,
but what gives gold its value? Yes, okay, it has some very narrow industrial applications, and yes, it's pretty, but let's be real. Most of the value comes from people's belief it has value. Without that belief, it's just a soft, off-colored, dense metal.
So if it's not its physical use case, what is it? Where does this perceived store of value come from? Well, the answer is actually relatively simple. Gold is the closest thing humanity has had to the perfect form of money for literally thousands of years. Its properties made it the obvious choice as a universal money. These properties have resulted in this historical belief. My hope is that by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of these topics and you'll be able to formulate your own opinion. Okay, so what are the properties or traits of the ideal form of money? Basically, in a perfect world, what traits would the ideal form of money have? I would say that it's something that is durable, stable, and won't dissipate or break down through time. Portable, can be sent in a fast, efficient, and affordable way. Uniform, meaning each unit is considered practically the same as a completely different unit. Divisible, can be broken down into small parts. Scarce, a limited supply and non-inflatable. Storable, it can be stored in an affordable and secure way. Accepted, for the most part, accepted by the general population as a form of money. Permissionless, your use of the currency can't be blocked by a third party. And in Bitcoin's case, verifiable. Transparent and can be independently verified to confirm payment. So if you look at this list, you quickly realize why gold was designated as the world's store of value thousands of years ago. Even compared to silver, it was obvious that it was the world's #1 choice. And of course, eventually became the world's designated store of value. It was clearly the best option available. So let's take a closer look and see how gold holds up against this list. Again, make sure you're thinking in terms of thousands of years ago. First, gold is relatively durable. It's more durable and resistive than a lot of other Why? It's more durable and resistive than a lot of other precious metal alternatives, on par with something like silver. As far as portability, obviously transporting gold was slow, expensive, and could be risky, but that was the case with pretty much every alternative at the time. As far as uniformity, it was completely fungible, meaning 1 pound of pure gold was almost always equal in value to a completely different pound of pure gold. This is almost a requirement for the practical exchange of a currency. As far as divisibility, it was moderately divisible. Unlike most options at the time, it could be melted down time and time again into smaller or larger quantities when needed. Again, this was a critical component when it came to gold. This was almost a requirement when it came to the practical exchange of a currency. Next, it was a scarce resource, meaning you couldn't just grow it like a crop or create more of it out of thin air. Actual energy and effort is needed to create more of it. As far as alternatives to gold, again, we have to compare it to its closest competitor, silver. Simply put, gold is more scarce. There's 200,000 metric tons of gold available in the world versus 1.7 million tons of silver. Actually, back in the 15th century, the Spanish found so much silver in what is now modern-day Bolivia that it slowly diluted the price of silver over the span of about 150 years. This is why scarcity is so important, especially when it comes to being a long-term store of value. Next, gold is storable, but at least in large quantities, it requires a lot of security, which can be very costly. Of course, this issue was applicable to pretty much every alternative at the time. So, as far as acceptability, obviously there was a point in time where gold was not accepted as a form of money or even as a storage of value. According to the World Gold Council, gold officially began being used as a currency around 550 BC in what is now modern-day Turkey. But there's evidence that it was informally being used as a form of money way before that. Of course, this was a time when information took a very long time to travel around the globe, or even couldn't travel around the globe. My guess is that gold was adopted in multiple separate locations as a form of money because it was such an obvious option. Next, gold is obviously permissionless. This is a trait that should be extremely common, but unfortunately is becoming increasingly more rare in our current financial system. Like most options back in the day, gold could not be blocked or frozen. I'm sure that a kingdom could ban the use of something like gold, but as long as there was a counterparty willing to accept it, you could use it without it being blocked. Unlike modern day currencies, which can absolutely be blocked or frozen. And then finally, verifiable. Obviously, there were no alternatives at the time that could leave an uncensorable record of payment. Despite gold obviously not fulfilling this last item, you can clearly see why gold was slowly adopted as the world's universal currency. Simply put, it was the closest thing that we had to the ideal form of money. I'm sure it being shiny had an effect on its adoption, but this list clearly explains the true reasons as to why it was determined as a store of value. So, now we have to finally answer the main question of this video. Could Bitcoin ever replace gold as the main store of value? And simply put, for something to even have a shot at dethroning the king, it has to be better than gold at being that ideal form of money. So now we have to answer the question, how does Bitcoin stack up against gold in these 9 areas? Well, let's start with durability. When it comes to Bitcoin and durability, it simply comes down to, do you know what you're doing or not? If you do something like sending it to the wrong BTC address, sending it to a different blockchain, losing your hardware wallet without recording your wallet's seed phrase, or leaving your funds on an exchange that goes bankrupt, gets hacked, or freezes your account, then the durability is extremely low. Like lose 100% of your funds low. If you don't do these things, then the durability is extremely high, like higher than gold. Simply put, gold wins in this category because Bitcoin requires some education and understanding. In Bitcoin's defense, eventually there will be innovations that make mistakes like this less likely. Next, portability. As previously discussed, transporting gold can be wildly expensive and can be risky. You're transporting a physical asset that can be lost or stolen. With Bitcoin, you don't need to transport anything, and your transaction literally travels at the speed of light. Not only that, for the first time ever, like in the world's history, you can transport your assets with literally just the clothes on your back. This is obviously revolutionary for people from very volatile countries that have internet access. For example, let's say that you're a refugee from Ukraine. You've worked really hard over your lifetime, so your net worth is relatively high. You have a bit of money in savings in the form of your local currency. You've invested in your local stock market, you own a house, you own a little bit of gold in the form of jewelry, and a little bit of gold being stored in your local bank. And finally, you own Bitcoin and you have your wallet's seed phrase memorized. Well, all of a sudden your country has been invaded and you have to flee the country practically overnight. And unfortunately, you only have time to grab a few pieces of jewelry, a couple keepsakes, and the clothes that are on your back. In this situation, assuming that your country loses the war, you're left with a few pieces of jewelry maybe. The rest is gone, nothing is left. But because you had your seed phrase memorized, you could have theoretically recovered unlimited life savings in the form of Bitcoin. That is something that is so powerful and something that has not existed in history. You could have been carrying nothing and recovered millions of dollars. But back to portability, Bitcoin obviously wins this one. Next, uniformity. I called this one a tie. You could split hairs on this and say that Bitcoin is technically more consistent because it's simply lines of code, but if you're buying pure gold, both assets are very fungible. fungible, meaning 1 ounce of gold is pretty much equal to a completely different ounce of gold. Or in Bitcoin's case, 1 Bitcoin to another Bitcoin. As far as divisibility, despite gold being fairly divisible, there's no explanation needed as to why you can't go to Starbucks and pay for your drink in the form of gold. It's not practical due to its lack of divisibility. With Bitcoin, it can be broken down all the way into 0.000000001 Bitcoin. That is 7 zeros, which is equivalent to 0.02 cents. Meaning this asset is currently more divisible than the US dollar. Meaning this asset can allow for microtransactions, which presents a bunch of different use cases that I simply don't have time to get into today. So yes, this asset is extremely divisible. Again, Bitcoin undoubtedly wins this one. As far as scarcity, despite both of these assets being relatively scarce, there is no doubt that Bitcoin is more scarce than gold. This is obviously due to its fixed supply. This isn't saying that gold isn't scarce enough, but for comparison's sake, there is no doubt that Bitcoin wins this one. Not only is there a max supply of just 21 million Bitcoin, it's estimated that 20% or 3.7 million Bitcoin in existence has been lost forever, and that number is still increasing. When it comes to gold, we just simply don't know how much will be discovered. An ongoing example of this is a massive gold discovery that was just found in Uganda. It's estimated that there are 31 million tons of gold in this discovery alone. If this turns out to be true, this would more than double the circulating supply of gold. In time, we'll find out if these estimates are accurate. By no means do I think this discovery would be a gold killer like some Bitcoin advocates want you to believe, but I don't think that things like this should be ignored. But despite all of this, I think both Bitcoin and gold pass whenever it comes to the scarcity test. But again, Bitcoin wins this one. So, as far as storability, I put low to moderate depending on how much gold you're holding. Obviously, if you're talking about a few gold necklaces, that's pretty easy to keep in your possession. But if you have a large net worth and you're storing that in the form of gold, you're obviously not storing that under your bed. Because of this, you have to have someone else hold it for you, which opens yourself up to counterparty risk and can be very expensive. Based on a few options that I found, it'll cost you about $360 a year to keep approximately $50,000 worth of gold in your local bank vault. If you want to put this into expense ratio terms, it'll cost you about 0.7% a year to store this gold. If you wanted to hold gold in the form of an ETF, one of the most popular options out there will cost you around 0.4% a year. Not only are these slightly expensive, but again, you're opening yourself up to counterparty risk. Ideally, you don't want to have somebody else hold your gold for you. Ultimately, you're trusting them to keep your gold safe, but in an extreme situation, you never know what will happen, whether they'll seize or freeze what you own. I know this sounds crazy, but this has happened in the past. A lot of people don't know this, but for example, in 1933, Order 6102 was signed. This order made holding onto gold that wasn't being used in industry, business, or art illegal to hold on to in the US. It required you to hand it over to the government. This order was repealed 41 years later in 1974, but of course, the US citizens that gave up their gold never got it back. When you compare this to Bitcoin, which you can self-custody in unlimited quantity, literally billions of dollars, in essentially a glorified flash drive for completely free, it's not even a fair comparison. A lot of people hear this and they think, well, that's not secure, but that's not necessarily true if you know what you're doing. If you understand what a seed phrase is or what a multi-signature wallet is, then you understand what I'm talking about. If you don't, that's a topic for another video. You can easily look it up here on YouTube. So the winner as far as the ability to safely and affordably store your asset absolutely goes to Bitcoin. Next, which asset is more widely accepted by the general public? Before I cover this, you could really approach this in two different ways. The first is it accepted as a form of payment? And the second is it accepted as a store of value? I'm going to try to answer both. As far as gold, I put moderate because it really isn't accepted as far as day-to-day transactions, which obviously goes back to its lack of divisibility. But to its credit, there is no doubt that it's accepted as a store of value. On top of that, gold is backed by over 2,000 years of history. As far as Bitcoin, it's clearly not accepted as a form of payment, at least as of right now. I know a lot of Bitcoin advocates are going to argue that there are now ways to use Bitcoin to pay for everyday transactions, but none of these are widely used, at least as of right now. But to its credit, with layering solutions like the Lightning Network, Bitcoin will have both the speed and the capacity to handle widespread use. Simply put, for Bitcoin to be widely used in any country that's not completely desperate for a more stable currency, two things need to happen. First, you'll need the price of Bitcoin to become less volatile. If the market cap of Bitcoin continues to grow and the public's view of Bitcoin continues to become more favorable, then its price should stabilize. This is the case with any new asset class. And second, you'll need friendly tax regulation when it comes to spending Bitcoin. Only time will tell on this. Now to arguably the most important question whenever it comes to replacing gold. Will Bitcoin ever be accepted as a store of value? Well, that'll be determined by multiple factors. First, as I mentioned before, the price has to stabilize. I realize that a lot of Bitcoin advocates are not going to agree with that statement, but that is my opinion. They believe that despite the dollar price of Bitcoin going up and down, that it maintains its value proposition. And then second, it goes back to what this video is really all about, which is, does Bitcoin do what gold is meant to do, but substantially better? By the end of this video, I really hope that you can formulate your own opinion whenever it comes to that question. So, as far as acceptability, there is no doubt that this one goes to gold. But keep in mind, Bitcoin has only existed for less than 15 years, so we'll see. The next trait of the ideal form of money is permissionless. I'm not totally sure if that's a word, but we're going with it. Permissionless just means that your asset or transaction can't be frozen or blocked by a third party, like a person, government, or company. With both of these assets, both gold and Bitcoin are permissionless. As long as there's a counterparty willing to accept your payment, your transaction can't be blocked. Obviously, any government can outright ban the use of either of these assets, but enforcing this is relatively difficult. But as Lynn Alden puts it, if the government adds enough friction or risk to using any asset, it can hinder its superiority compared to other options. So to finish this up, I gave both assets a high rating whenever it comes to permissionless. But of course, you do have to take into account the higher risk whenever it comes to Bitcoin being banned by a government, because of its ability to be used as a currency. Finally, the last trait is verifiable. Obviously, there's no way something like gold could have this. In Bitcoin's case, there's a permanent record of payment that can't be changed by anyone. You can literally go back on the blockchain and see the very first transaction that was ever completed. That is a very powerful tool. This way, there's always proof of payment, which adds a level of transparency. Basically, there will always be a receipt of every transaction that has ever occurred on the Bitcoin network. In certain situations, you could argue that this is good and bad, but that's up for the market to decide. So, that's my comparison of the two assets. Based on this list, we can clearly see that Bitcoin is no doubt closer to being the ideal form of money. Even if you debate that gold's purpose has evolved into purely a store of value rather than a transactional currency, based on its scarcity and ability to be stored, Bitcoin is better at that too. But does that mean that the superior option will win over 2,000 years of history? Only time will tell. Neither gold or dollars are good at both being a long-term store of value and facilitating day-to-day transactions. As Bitcoin and layering solutions on top of Bitcoin have developed, it's clear that Bitcoin is going to be good at both of those things. So that leads me to the very last question. Does Bitcoin have to take all of gold's market share to grow exponentially? My opinion is no. I don't think that it does. Assuming that the government provides relatively friendly regulation and tax policy in the future, I think that Bitcoin can carve out its own niche within the financial markets. It has unique use cases compared to everything else that exists today, and it has already established a niche within the crypto market. Simply put, it's the most secure and decentralized blockchain out there. So, what's the answer to the question, will Bitcoin replace gold? And the answer is, I don't know. But I don't think that anything will ever fully replace gold. But again, I don't think that Bitcoin has to. I think that it's clearly on its way to becoming its own asset class. So thank you guys for watching. I really hope that you learned something today. If you have any questions, make sure to ask them below. Definitely subscribe to my channel. It's a good time around here and I think you'll learn some stuff. So thank you guys for watching and I'll see you next time.
Attention young men and women, subscribe to Travis White's channel. He needs your help to defeat the evil, broke YouTuber depression.